The first account comes from a hiker in northern Arizona. In 2017, Marcus was an experienced solo hiker who frequently ventured into remote areas of the Southwest. He shared his experience anonymously on a paranormal forum, describing an encounter that fundamentally changed his relationship with nature. I've been hiking solo through remote parts of the American Southwest for over a decade. I know the landscape, the wildlife, and how to stay safe in the wilderness. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered in the Navajo Nation borderlands. I'd planned a 3-day trek through a lesser-known canyon system. The trail was barely marked, but I had good maps and GPS. On the second day around dusk, I set up camp in a small clearing about 50 yards from a natural spring. After eating dinner, I noticed how unnaturally quiet it had become. No insects buzzing, no birds calling, just absolute silence. Anyone who spends time in nature knows this is usually a warning sign. As darkness fell, I started hearing what sounded like footsteps circling my campsite, just beyond the reach of my firelight. I called out thinking it might be another hiker, but received no response. The footsteps continued, methodically circling my position. Then came the whistle, a distinct 3-note pattern that sounded almost human, but not quite right. It was melodic, but somehow wrong, like someone trying to imitate a tune they'd heard, but couldn't quite reproduce correctly. The whistling continued intermittently for about an hour, sometimes seeming to come from different directions simultaneously. I kept my fire burning high and my knife close. Around midnight, I spotted something at the edge of my camp. It looked like a coyote at first glance, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was much too large, nearly the size of a wolf, but with proportions that seemed distorted. Its front legs appeared unnaturally long, and it stood with a strange, almost human-like posture. What disturbed me most were its eyes. They reflected my firelight, not with the usual animal eye shine, but with what looked like human eyes staring back at me. They seemed to hold intelligence and malice that no animal should possess. When it realized I was looking directly at it, it made that same 3-note whistle, while maintaining eye contact, before melting back into the darkness. I abandoned my campsite that night, hiking out with just my emergency gear, despite the dangers of navigating the canyon in darkness. I'd rather risk a fall than spend another minute near whatever that thing was. Local Navajo residents I spoke with later refused to discuss the incident in detail, but one elder simply said, "You were being hunted." I've never returned to that area, and I no longer hike alone. Some things, once seen, can't be unseen, and some wilderness is best left unexplored. Marcus's account shares many common elements with other alleged Skinwalker encounters: the unnatural silence, mimicry of human sounds, and animals with disturbingly human-like characteristics. But even more frightening are encounters where these entities seemingly attempt to lure people away from safety. Our second account comes from a family living on the outskirts of a small town in rural New Mexico. The Lambert family had moved from Chicago to a remote property in 2019, seeking a quieter life. Sarah Lambert shared their experience after they'd relocated back to an urban area. "We thought we'd found paradise. 5 acres of land backing up to national forest, a renovated farmhouse, and enough space for our 3 children to roam and explore. The first few months were everything we'd hoped for. Then winter came, and things changed. It started with our livestock acting strangely. We had a small flock of chickens and 2 goats, and they began to seem agitated at night, even when secured in their enclosures. Our dogs would growl at the darkness, refusing to go outside after sunset. We installed motion sensor lights, thinking we might have coyotes or other predators nearby. One night in January, around 2 a.m., our youngest son, Tyler, who was 6 at the time, came into our bedroom saying someone was calling his name from outside his window. We assumed it was a nightmare until our daughter reported the same thing the following night. Someone calling her by name, asking her to come outside and play. My husband checked the property but found nothing. We started keeping the windows locked and the curtains drawn at night. Then one evening, while my husband was away on business, I heard what sounded exactly like his voice calling from the backyard, asking me to help bring in some groceries from the car. I nearly went out before remembering he wasn't due home for 2 more days. The breaking point came when I was home alone with the children. It was just after sunset, and I heard scratching at our back door. Through the peephole, I saw what appeared to be an elderly Native American woman, hunched over and seemingly in distress. She was asking for water in a raspy voice. Something felt wrong. We were miles from any neighbor, and it made no sense for an elderly person to be wandering alone in near freezing temperatures. I called out that I would call emergency services for her, and the woman's demeanor instantly changed. She straightened up unnaturally tall and began scratching more violently at the door. When I looked again, her eyes had changed. They were yellow and slitted like an animal's. She smiled with too many teeth and said my children's names in their own voices, one after another. I grabbed the kids and locked us in the bathroom with my phone and a gun until morning. When daylight came, there were deep scratches all over our back door and strange, elongated footprints in the mud that started human-like but transformed into something else entirely as they led back toward the forest. We moved out the following week. A Native American colleague of my husband's later told him never to speak of what happened, especially not by name, as acknowledging these entities only gives them more power. The mimicry of familiar voices is perhaps one of the most disturbing aspects of alleged Skinwalker encounters. These entities are said to use voices of loved ones to lure victims into vulnerable positions, a tactic that plays on our deep-seated trust in those we care about. Our third account comes from a hunter in northern Utah, near an area that paranormal enthusiasts might recognize, not far from the infamous Skinwalker Ranch, a property so plagued by unexplained phenomena that it became the subject of scientific study. James was an experienced hunter who had been tracking deer in the Uinta Basin when his familiar hunting trip turned into something nightmarish. His account, shared through a friend who works in paranormal research, offers a glimpse into an encounter that defies conventional explanation. I've been hunting these mountains for over 20 years. I know every ridge and valley, what animals should be where, and how they should behave. What I encountered last October violated everything I understand about nature. I was in my usual spot before dawn, a small hidden blind overlooking a clearing where deer often feed in the early morning. As the sun rose, I spotted a large buck at the edge of the clearing, possibly the biggest I'd ever seen in the area. It was standing half hidden behind a pine tree, not moving or grazing, just watching the clearing. Something about its behavior felt wrong. Deer are cautious, alert animals, constantly scanning for threats and rarely staying still for long. This one had been motionless for nearly 15 minutes. I raised my binoculars for a better look and nearly dropped them when I got a clear view. The deer's eyes were facing forward like a predator's, not on the sides of its head where they should be, and they looked almost human, with white sclera visible around dark irises. As I watched, frozen, the deer slowly stepped out from behind the tree, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. It rose up on its hind legs and stood upright for a moment, its front legs hanging awkwardly at its sides like arms. Then it turned its head 180 degrees, physically impossible for a deer, and looked directly at my position, despite me being well hidden. It opened its mouth and made a sound I'll never forget, a perfect imitation of my hunting partner's voice, calling my name and asking for help. My partner had canceled this trip at the last minute due to a family emergency. I abandoned my blind and ran back to my truck, feeling watched the entire way. When I reached the road, I found strange tracks crossing the dirt path, hoofprints that gradually transformed into what looked like elongated human footprints before disappearing into the brush. I later learned from local Ute tribal members that the area has long been considered cursed, ground haunted by those who borrow skin. They warned me that once such a being speaks your name, it will track your scent forever, waiting for the moment you mistake its voice for someone you trust.